All right, guys, it's Mountain Monday, so you know what to do. Breathe in and out, and breathe in and out. Yes, Mountain Monday, your weekly dose of Zen. And the Zen topic for today that I have come up with based on my own experiences for the past 4 days is making fun of the war on humor. Yes, making fun of the war on humor. What does this mean? Well, you may have noticed that people have a tendency to get offended by jokes nowadays. Color me crazy, but it seems to be happening a lot. And part of the thing driving the offense behind jokes is this idea that jokes are a way of pushing forward truth by other ways. Well, that's how you really feel, instead of just making a joke because it's a funny play on words or because it's, venting or just want to have a brief snippet of time where you don't choose every word as carefully as some people pick out a wedding dress, right? And this, to me, this idea that jokes are truth by other means is factually accurate, I suppose. A person has to have the thought to say it, but it shows a fundamental lack of understanding of how humor works. The sort of formula that comedians use is comedy is tragedy plus time. And there are, obviously different types of humor, but at the core of all humor is that it's not going to work on someone who doesn't have a sense of humor. And there are plenty of people in the world who do not have a sense of humor. Sometimes that's temporary. Sometimes people are going through a really bad time and can't be expected to have, the same sense of humor that they normally would while all things are hunky-dory. But some people are just humorless. They're miserable people and can't understand that the rest of us tend to cope with stressful or unpleasant circumstances through making them more enjoyable through jokes. And where is this coming from today? Well, I had a conversation with a person who decided to inform me that I wasn't funny. I'm not funny. The exact words, I believe, were, "You're a terrible comedian." Guru? Where are the facts to back up this argument? The justification for saying I was a terrible comedian is that I offended people with some of my comments. I offended people, therefore I'm a terrible comedian. So let's look at the long list of terrible comedians that I joined based on that. Lenny Bruce was a terrible comedian. He offended people. George Carlin, terrible comedian. He offended lots of people. Howard Stern, not at all funny. Offended too many people. I mean, there are people who were offended by SpongeBob SquarePants. Not funny, right? Not at all funny. That Minion toy that people thought was swearing, they were offended. Obviously, the Minions are not at all funny. No entertainment value there. Do you see what I'm getting at? People come to these conclusions based on fundamentally flawed thinking. And what do you do in these situations? Well, my solution was to make fun of them. And that may not sound very nice, but hear me out. This is clearly a person that has no sense of decorum, right? They really don't understand that telling someone they're a terrible comedian doesn't do anything good. Because first, I'm not going to listen. I wrote comedy for 8 years. It is impossible that I am a terrible comedian. I got paid for it. If I was really so bad, no one would have given me money to write funnies. Like, this is just silly. But it was such a delightfully absurd situation because there was a bystander to this who said nothing. You know, not that's not nice, or come on, you're not being fair. So many people on the internet, they just sit there and let people say horrible shit to people. And am I going to take any sort of stock in the comments of a humorless SOB that would actually say to someone, you're a terrible whatever? No. Anybody that humorless is miserable and most likely projecting themselves onto other things. And the argument's absurd. The argument is absolutely absurd. And there were other things in the conversation that, made it really clear that this person is exceptionally thin-skinned and needs the world to go exactly the way they need it to not, be constantly on the verge of having a complete emotional meltdown. And that's the beautiful thing about humor for me. Comedy, humor allows you to be, at least what I have found, allows you to be okay with stuff not going your way. Because you can laugh at it, right? When things go completely to crap, what do you tend to tell yourself at the time? This is going to be a funny story later. When things are just so awful, so completely over the top ridiculous. You have this moment of clarity and say, this is going to be a funny story later. And that's how you get through bad stuff, right? And it's odd to me that this would be based on, what's funny is some of it was based on events I had done where other people weren't funny, to the point that these powers that be, these comedy critics, decided the whole event wasn't about comedy because some people sucked. Like, some people didn't get the memo and showed up and did straight vanilla presentations that were not at all in this period of what the event was supposed to be. That happens. You get booked for certain things, and doing a gig for the first time means you've done it for the first time. You have no idea what you're walking into. And you can actually be in a situation where it was a complete mismatch for the event. I saw a very funny woman by the name of Carla Collins get booked for this Italian cultural picnic. And it was all these old Italian grandmothers. And Carla's hilarious, but her comedy is rather, we'll say, blue. She tells a lot of penis jokes and things like this. So she's up there doing her set, trying out new material, telling dick jokes to a crowd full of, I don't know what the word for it is in Italian, but boobies. They're Italian grand lady, like they're old Italian ladies sitting there very politely, not saying a word while this woman's on stage going on about the penis. And there's nothing you can do. You have to do the set because you said you would. And you can tailor your approach somewhat, but there's only so much I can do. Anybody can do. I mean, I know other comedians who do, late night shows. They're midnight shows, and midnight comedy shows tend to be those things that are, they tend to be black humor. And black humor, I don't mean a racial thing. I mean, it's edgy. And I don't want to say edgy. It's because it's not edgy means you're on the edge. Black humor is deliberately crossing the line, and there's a legitimacy to that. But if people aren't ready for it, that's fine. That's why they're in comedy clubs and they're clearly labeled as such, and people know what they're going into. There's content advisories all over the place, right? Unfortunately, in the age of YouTube, these things end up on the internet and people take them out of context, and it's like, oh, what a terrible human being this person is. And that has really messed up some comedians I know to be excellent people with, wives and families, and they're good people. They just, have a delightfully warped sense of humor that is hilarious in context. I mean, I know very brilliant comedians, one of which he's a guy by the name of Andre Arruda. He does a show for Vice Canada right now, but his stand-up is all about his disabilities and the fact that he's a little person, right? And if he's not allowed to make fun of his own experience, like that robs him of joy in life. He's hilarious. The way he is able to step away from his own struggle to make that struggle entertainment for other people is amazing. And nobody should tell him he shouldn't be able to do it because of disability stigma and all that. I think it's breaking down disability stigma. But, other comedians I know have done bits on current events and, the run-on joke of too soon, too soon. Gilbert Gottfried talks about the whole too soon thing quite eloquently, because he says, yeah, there's too soon, but too soon is better than too late a lot of the times, because then you're actually an innovator in comedy. If it's way too soon, you get what happened to him with, his Aflac contract and his tsunami jokes. But, to Gilbert's credit, he's willing to take those lumps. He's willing to take those lumps because he believes in being free as a comedian. But too many comedians are being stifled by this idea that if some people don't find you funny and heaven forbid get offended by something you say, then that means you should stop. No, absolutely not. That's ludicrous. There's a time and a place for certain types of comedy, absolutely. But I mean, on YouTube, you got to know what you're getting into on YouTube. Read the descriptions before, you dive in, and recognize that if you are watching a video for a comedian known to do kind of darker material, then you're going to get dark material, and don't be complaining. And I mean, I know one comedian that was doing his routine about a current event, and somebody, I don't know why you would do this to someone, showed the victim's family member, because it was about a horrific murder, and they showed the victim's family member the clip, and it led to lawsuits and all that. Why would anyone do that? Like, that's not the fault of the comedian, because the comedian was in no way making fun of the person who died. They were making fun of the absurdity of the corporate response to what followed, because there was a corporate liability issue that sprung up from it. But why the hell would you show that to the person? I think it was their mother. And why should the comedian be blamed for a third party's utter lack of judgment in that regard? And this is, one of my rules for the internet, going through my own shit, is there's a time and a place that you have to know, don't look. And I wish there were better tools on certain social networks that when you log in, you didn't immediately see the feed, right? You could go right to your own sort of personal curated page or your messages. I wish there was a way to route where you chose to go, because people shouldn't have to back away from social networking when they're going through a difficult or tragic time, because let's face it, there are a lot of people on social networks who want to support people going through difficult times. I've seen it over and over and over again. People are very willing to reach out and offer support. But there are also people that decide to be assholes. So, rule of thumb for me is I don't discuss publicly, if I can help it, anything I'm actually still upset about. If I can't laugh at it, I don't talk about it. And it's amazing to me the number of people who are like, you were angry or you were triggered or this and that. And I was like, what? And for a long time, I thought, what am I doing wrong that people think I'm so angry all the time? And it occurred to me this week that it wasn't me at all. It's other people applying how they use social networking to my communications. I realized that some people actually do post when they're very, very angry about something. And I think that's a terrible idea. But like, no, what? I don't put the most painful elements of my life on Twitter. That's insane. Like, that's a great way to end up horribly depressed, because the internet is full of idiots, especially Twitter. Like, at least Facebook, you can lock things off. I guess if you've got no, you know what? Not even with protected tweets should you put sensitive things on Twitter because of all the stupid subtweeting and screen capturing that goes on. I mean, one evil person who you haven't been able to screen out because they're a dick, screen caps your thing and spreads it around. That's all it takes. Trust me, I know. But I haven't protected my tweets because I don't see the point. My attitude towards social networking is it is public utterances. So I don't see the point of having a Twitter page or a Facebook page that you lock down. I see it's valid for other people, but quite honestly, if I don't treat things like Facebook and Twitter as public activities, I don't see the point in them for me, right? If I want to have private communications with people, I'll take it to email or Skype, or heaven forbid, if you're in the same city, get together with the people. If people have my personal information, like, I don't know, does anybody else feel like this? That if you've got my cell phone number, text me. Or if you've got my email address, email me. Because those are methods of communication that other people don't have. The people that Facebook me to get a hold of me quickly when they have other ways that they could communicate with me, it's always baffling to me. Because like, why would you use the communication channel completely cluttered up by the public when you have my direct contact information that I don't even put on my business card because there are certain things that have to be functional? And, the reality of my job is everybody's got an opinion. And everybody's entitled to their opinion. But what I don't get is this idea that thing of you're a terrible comedian. Well, thank you. Thanks. Come again. Hope you enjoyed your visit. What are you supposed to say to that? Like, all right, this conversation is over. You don't respect what I do, and now the feeling is mutual because I think you're a rude prick. Like, those communications are only intended to me to act superior. And when someone is that invested in acting superior, they're not someone I listen to because their opinion is not, it doesn't seem like a good one to listen to. That will steer me in the wrong direction. It will steer me to be a boring, frightened person. And I don't want to be a boring, frightened person. I want to be an exciting, brave person. And if you want to be a boring, frightened person, that's your call. There's plenty of, room in the world for boring, frightened people. You're actually the majority. But I want to be different. I want to live instead of just exist. And I don't want to be so afraid of criticisms or offense or all that stuff. And I mean, it would be a lot nicer if I had the liberty of some other personalities did, where I could just go, yeah, fuck you very much. It would be a lot easier if I could just do that, but I can't for various reasons that I can't do anything about. I'm limited. And that's frustrating because I see other people being rewarded to standing up for their critics and then standing up to their critics. And then when I go, you know what? GTFO, man, you're way, way off it. That wasn't very nice. You need to learn to handle criticism. Handling criticism means knowing which criticism to listen to and not listen to, guys. And that's exceptionally important. And there are certain things that people do that make it very clear that theirs is not an informed criticism, and therefore it shouldn't be listened to. And the path to happiness, the path to enjoying life, the path to looking forward to getting out of bed and going to work and making something of yourself is honing your judgment of which people you should listen to and which people are just, thanks for your feedback. Thanks for watching, or you have yourself a good day, because if you listen to every critic, my God, you're going to have nothing left. And so here are some things. So you're aware. This is me personally. I'm sure I'm not alone based on conversations I've had with other creatives. If someone starts off by saying you're terrible at what you do, you're an idiot, you're not informed, whatever, especially when it's something you've put 50 hours of research in, when it's just a blanket dismissal of everything you had, you don't listen. Why? Because this is a person who's outright completely dismissing you. They come at you immediately negative. They're saying they think you have absolutely no value, which gives you nowhere to go. And so you move on to someone who actually thinks you do have something to offer and who's willing to make you better instead of just telling you you're bad. The second thing is when someone can't tell the difference between a disagreement of opinion and an actual mistake of fact. And I've seen this all the time. And I wanted to get involved in one thing, and I'm still thinking about doing it, but I don't know. I don't know if it's going to help. But I've seen this one thing, and this other op-ed writer wrote this great piece, and I'm watching it get torn apart. And it's like, no, you guys absolutely did not understand what this writer was saying. They were saying that this is how this event has personally affected me. These are my opinions. This is what's relevant to me. Not, here's an article about all of it that seeks to be definitive. When someone says this is what it means to me, that's all it means. And someone turning around and writing 1,600 words about why they're wrong about what's relevant to them shows they don't get it. So, in that case, I would read the first 3 lines, recognize that this is a response to what people were inferring into things as opposed to what I actually wrote, and completely disregard it because it's not helpful and it's going to be a downer and a waste of my time. And that's the third thing that makes a creative with healthy self-esteem dismiss your criticism almost right off the bat, especially in comedy, is when someone tells me I inferred something I didn't say and said I didn't mean. That's just projection, and this person's feedback is not going to be useful to me because they're not listening to me when I say I didn't say that and that wasn't my intent. When someone goes, yeah, but you meant it or you inferred it, there's a reason it's called an inference, because it's not explicit. Inference, implicit. Actually stated, explicit. And especially in a written piece, it's really hard to infer intent, to the point that in English literature, in the study of English literature, not humanities, not this postmodern Maffiel's analysis, in actual hard English literature analysis, you are not allowed to infer author intent. You're not. The only way you're allowed to include intent is if it's like, if the Fresh Prince says, this is a story all about how my life got turned upside down. Well, then you can say this is about a change in his life because he said it. But the minute you start saying what the author is trying to say you have to focus on what the author said. You have to actually use what's in the text. It's got to be a textual analysis, because otherwise people can infer anything they want. And that's when you get silly things like, the Lord of the Rings was a metaphor for the Iraq War, even though it was written in the 1940s. Silly things like that in postmodern humanities criticism, that is absolutely valid because the feels are reals. But if you're actually looking at a structured modernist approach, which is what things like, English literature, that's the difference, is when you take something like English literature, it's a modernist stream, not a postmodernist stream. And this probably means nothing to most people, but you are not allowed to read yourself into it. And I know this because I was very ambitious in my first year English literature. I did a paper on how Robinson Crusoe is an unreliable narrator, because we were studying unreliable narrators in a different part of the course. But Robinson Crusoe is not one of them. And I pointed out textually, he was the only witness to what occurred. You know, the only other guy was Friday, and he doesn't speak English, so no one's going to ask him, right? And so I pointed out that Robinson Crusoe and adventure stories of that period are actually stories about stories. They're stories about survivor accounts where no one is around to corroborate that that element. And that, you know, going back and reading these stories from a modern perspective, we can we have to sort of recognize, wait, this isn't the objective story of a guy going out and shooting, you know, endangered species and black people with an elephant gun. This is the story about a guy who went and claimed to do that. And it makes all those ridiculous moments in those stories make so much more sense, you know, when an entire tribe bows down to him and everything like that. I think I'm confusing some things. But anyway, that type of story, I'm mushing it all together. I'm sort of metaing that adventure story, you know, Alan Quatermain. And I mean, Alan Quatermain's told from a perspective. There are other people, his son and people like that. And, but anyway, I talked about the fact that in this particular instance, there's no one else to back up his story, and it's told first person. Well, the professor was a comparative lit guy instead of an English lit guy, and I really had to push him on it. But eventually he gave me an all right mark, even though he grumbled and insisted that was not... The guy who was telling us we're not allowed to interpret how something was intended to be read grumbled that he didn't think it was intended to be read that way. Of course it's not intended to be read that way, but author intent doesn't matter. That was my argument. You know, you guys wonder where I came from. This is what a university education is supposed to do. It is supposed to train your thinking to go past your own personal opinion and actually create something that can be of value to others, right? And I became, little bit of my background, I became so disillusioned with the fact that the university system in theory was set up to do that. And I know this because, you know, I grew up around academics. I grew up around scientists and things like that who always encouraged me to think critically. And so I saw that the system was intended to challenge, right? But then when we get into the study of culture, this whole feelings thing became the paradigm. And feelings are exceptionally important. I mean, when you're studying art, feelings are integral. But you have to be able to separate your own personal response from what the work is doing. And that can sometimes be exceptionally challenging. It can, you know. But that's where the training comes in. And it's hard. But I think that we sort of have to get back onto a paradigm, even in comedy, as opposed to this accepting every time someone says they're offended, or never listening when someone says they're offended. We have to sort of get back to this idea of, is it reasonable to be offended by this? Was something amiss that made the positive intent not register? And that's important to look at, because no comedian wants to offend people. The whole idea is you're trying to offend, like you're trying to make your audience laugh by offending some imaginary person who's not in the room. It's like, well, let's laugh at the people that don't get this, right? Like when you're doing that kind of comedy, that's where it comes from. You're talking to your audience and you're trying to make people feel better about being sort of flawed and, you know, imperfect human beings. That's the whole purpose of comedy, is we look at the flaws so we can laugh at them and feel better about them because we recognize no one's perfect. That's why tragedies are written about nobles, and comedies tend to be written about commoners. Blah. Okay, I'm stumbling on my words. Time to wrap up. So that's why I think it's important to not lose our sense of humor and not fall prey to this war on comedy. And the only way we're going to get out of this war on comedy, this war on humor, is to laugh at it. So in future, guys, if you see something and it's like, oh, wow, she must really be angry. No, I'm usually taking the piss out of something. And when I'm legitimately pissed off about something, I will actually say, at this point, I am pissed off. And I do get pissed off. And the thing that pisses me off is when people try to shut down someone else's right to expression because they don't like it. Not even that they're offended. That's really what it comes down to, is that they're offended. But people are getting offended by the idea that people would choose to block other people on Twitter now. It's getting ridiculous. And it's getting to the point where there really is an assault on professionals' creative integrity. The audience thinks they have a right to dictate what the performer does, and that's just not the case. If you don't like this performer, go see another performer you do like. Don't tell the performer to change the act. The example, the alternative to that is somebody who's like, you know what, I really like your work, and I just wish this element you would learn more about, because there's some things I don't think you're getting, and I'd be happy to talk to you about it if you choose. But, I'm not going to stop listening to your stuff because of this one thing. I just think it could be made better, and it's already great. Someone will listen to that, because everybody wants to improve and everybody wants to evolve. And you see people grow. When people have enough of a career, you see them grow. That's why I'm such a massive fan of Howard Stern. He's got such a long career that you go back and listen to what he was doing. Even 10 years ago, my God, it's not even the same guy. And I think how glorious that the outrage warriors of past decades were not able to shoot him down, because we're able to see this wonderful, authentic progression of a single human being played out in morning radio. And the shock, I think, in the shock jock tradition he brought up was the fact that he was being honest. And that's what I think no other shock jock has really captured the same way Stern did. Stern wasn't trying to shock. He was just saying what came to his mind at any given time. And that was contradictory and sometimes hypocritical and flawed and sometimes not very nice. But that's people, right? And authenticity is so shocking that's why he was able to go on and build his career. I think the other thing is he was very loyal to the people around him, but he wasn't trying to offend people. He was doing things that he didn't think should be offensive in the first place. And so he was like, I see no reason to stop doing this, so I'm going to continue. And that's what's made him great. But you listen to his stuff on satellite radio, it's nothing like the stuff he did on terrestrial radio. There are moments where it still gets silly and kind of over-the-top sexual, but it's mostly just his life, and he talks about his cats, and he talks about, it's like, wow, I listened to the Howard Stern stuff when he was back on terrestrial radio, but it's not the same show. He's evolved. And that's the importance of authenticity. My God, if anybody has contributed to the landscape of observational comedy, I don't know of many people who are going to have the legacy of someone like Howard Stern, because he dared to be honest. And that's what we're losing when we bow to outrage. We're losing that honesty. We're losing that willingness to be wrong. Tell me I'm wrong. Don't tell me I'm terrible because you think I'm wrong. So that's sort of the zen for the day. And it was much longer than I thought because it turned into a much bigger topic. But the people who listen to this seem to like the longer videos. I mean, I do a little 5-minute snippet on cosplay for people who like short, and some of these are short. These turn out not to be short. These topics end up being much bigger than I think they are going in, and that's okay. That's the purpose of this format, is to talk things out, right? That's the authenticity I was talking about before. So if you like it, great. If you don't, go watch something else. So ready? Breathe in. And out. And breathe in.